November 18th, 2025, 10:47 p.m. 87 Shahed drones, 3 approach corridors, 1 target city. 7 hours later, the largest single-city drone barrage of the entire war would be over, and Russian commanders would be writing after-action reports admitting total failure. This is the story of the night Kharkiv refused to fall. I'm your host at Warfist TV, where we analyze the battles that change wars. And tonight, we're breaking down one of the most extraordinary air defense engagements in modern military history. Not because of the technology involved, though we'll get deep into that. Not because of the scale, though 87 attack drones converging on a single city is unprecedented. But because of the men and women who fought from dusk until dawn, repositioning between volleys, firing from rooftops, burning through ammunition stocks, and never once abandoning their posts. Because when Russia designed this attack, they weren't just trying to hit Kharkiv. They were trying to prove that Ukrainian air defense could be broken. That with enough drones, enough vectors, enough saturation, they could punch holes wide enough to send cruise missiles through at first light. They were wrong. Let's start with what Russian planners were looking at in the first week of November 2025. Kharkiv sits roughly 40 kilometers from the Russian border. It's Ukraine's second largest city, home to approximately 1.3 million people, and it has been under near constant aerial harassment since the first months of the full-scale invasion. But by autumn 2025, something had changed. Ukraine's mobile air defense network around Kharkiv had become one of the most effective in the entire theater. Gepard self-propelled anti-aircraft guns, originally supplied by Germany, had proven devastatingly effective against slow-moving Shahed drones. Buk M1 medium-range systems provided a layered umbrella, and dozens of mobile fire teams, soldiers with DSK heavy machine guns, and even modified anti-aircraft guns mounted on pickup trucks filled the gaps between the heavier systems. Russian planners knew this. Satellite reconnaissance, signals intelligence, and drone overflights had mapped many of the known Ukrainian air defense positions across Kharkiv Oblast. And that knowledge formed the basis of a plan that had been in development since early October. The concept was simple in theory, catastrophic in ambition. Launch the largest Shahed barrage ever directed at a single city. Not spread across Ukraine, not diluted across multiple oblasts. Every drone aimed at Kharkiv. Overwhelm the defenders through sheer volume, force them to expend their missile stocks. And once the air defense umbrella was thin enough, send KH-101 cruise missiles through the gaps at dawn to hit the real targets: power substations, transformer yards, and heating infrastructure. With winter approaching, knocking out Kharkiv's heating grid would create a humanitarian catastrophe and potentially force a mass evacuation. Which weapon system was the real threat in this attack? A. The Shahed drones. B. The KH-101 cruise missiles timed for dawn. C. The combined saturation strategy. Drop your answer in the comments below. Russian logistics for the operation were substantial. 87 Shahed, 136 drones, each carrying a 40-kilogram warhead, powered by a small Mado MD-550 engine producing roughly 50 horsepower. Cruising at speeds between 150 and 185 kilometers per hour at altitudes typically between 200 and 1,000 meters. At roughly $20,000 to $50,000 per unit depending on sourcing estimates, the entire Shahed component of the attack represented between $1.7 million and $4.3 million, a fraction of the cost of a single cruise missile. And that was the point. Shaheds were expendable. Their job wasn't necessarily to destroy targets. Their job was to exhaust defenders. The drones were launched from 3 staging areas. Ukrainian intelligence, working with signals intercepts and satellite imagery shared by Western partners, identified launches originating from Krasnodar Krai in southern Russia, from positions in occupied Zaporizhzhia Oblast, and from a forward staging point in Belgorod Oblast directly north of Kharkiv. 3 vectors: south, southeast, and north, converging on the city like spokes toward a hub. The first wave launched at approximately 10:30 p.m. on November 17th, though the drones wouldn't reach Kharkiv airspace until roughly 10:47 p.m. due to their relatively slow cruise speed. The timing was deliberate. Russian planners wanted the attack to span the entire night, grinding down Ukrainian crews through exhaustion. Waves would arrive in intervals, forcing constant readiness. And by 5 or 6 a.m., when crews were at their most fatigued, The Kh-101 cruise missiles would launch from two 95 ms strategic bombers already airborne over the Caspian Sea. At least that was the plan. Ukrainian intelligence had been tracking unusual drone logistics movements in Krasnodar for nearly a week prior. Increased truck convoys to known Shahed launch sites, additional fuel deliveries, communications chatter referencing what Ukrainian signals intelligence analysts interpreted as a large-scale strike package. By November 16th, Kharkiv's Air Defense Command had received warning something big was coming. The response was immediate. Gepard crews moved to pre-planned dispersal positions across the oblast. Each Gepard, a German-built self-propelled anti-aircraft gun armed with twin 35mm Oerlikon KDA autocannons, had proven itself as one of the most cost-effective Shahed killers in the war. Its radar-guided fire control system could track and engage low-altitude targets with devastating accuracy. Each gun fires at 550 rounds per minute per barrel. Against a Shahed traveling at 170 kilometers per hour at 300 meters altitude, a Gepard crew needed less than 3 seconds of sustained fire to achieve a kill. The problem was ammunition. Each Gepard carries 640 rounds of 35mm ammunition. Against 87 drones, every round mattered. Book M1 batteries repositioned to cover the primary approach corridors. The Book's 9 M38 missiles could engage targets at ranges up to 35 kilometers and altitudes from 15 meters to 22,000 meters. Against Shaheds, the Book was overkill in terms of capability, but essential for the outer defense ring, intercepting drones before they reached the city. And then there were the mobile fire teams, dozens of them. Soldiers with heavy machine guns, some mounted on the beds of civilian pickup trucks, others set up on the rooftops of apartment buildings on the city's outskirts. These were the inner ring, the last line of defense. If a Shahed got past the Gepards and the Bucks, it was a machine gunner on a rooftop who would have to bring it down. By 9 p.m. on November 17th, the entire air defense network was at full readiness. Crews performed final equipment checks. Ammunition counts were verified. Communication links between units were tested. And then they waited. The first radar contact came at 10:41 p.m., a cluster of slow-moving returns bearing south-southeast, altitude approximately 400 meters, speed 160 kilometers per hour. Consistent with Shahed 136 profiles. 6 contacts initially, then 8, then 12. The southern wave was arriving. Stay with me. What happens over the next 7 hours is one of the most intense air defense battles of the entire war. At 10:47 p.m., the first Gepard opened fire. The crew, positioned on the southern outskirts near the village of Merefa, had acquired 2 Shaheds on their radar at a range of 4.2 kilometers. The twin 35mm cannons erupted, sending streams of tracer-laced rounds into the night sky. The first drone disintegrated at 3.1 kilometers. The second took a burst that sheared off its left wing, sending it corkscrewing into an open field where it detonated on impact. 2 Shaheds down in the first 90 seconds. But this was just the beginning. By 11 p.m., radar screens across the Kharkiv defense network were showing over 20 inbound contacts. The southern wave had grown to approximately 30 drones, spread across a 15-kilometer front, flying at varying altitudes between 200 and 600 meters. Some flew in pairs. Others came in staggered formations, with trailing drones offset by several hundred meters to complicate targeting solutions. Russian engineers had also made modifications. Several of the Shaheds carried radar reflectors, small metallic attachments designed to make the drone's radar signature appear larger or create false returns. It was a crude countermeasure, but against a crew trying to prioritize dozens of targets simultaneously, even a moment of confusion could allow a drone to slip through. The Gepard crews adapted. They switched to short, controlled bursts rather than sustained fire, conserving ammunition while maintaining kill rates. One crew near Chuhuev reported engaging and destroying 4 Shaheds in 11 minutes, expending only 160 rounds. Disciplined fire, calm nerves, professional execution. At 11:23 p.m., the northern wave arrived. This was the approach the defenders had feared most. Shaheds launching from Kharkiv Oblast had the shortest transit distance, roughly 80 kilometers to the city center. They arrived fast, with less warning time, and on a vector that put them directly over densely populated residential neighborhoods within minutes of crossing into Ukrainian-controlled airspace. A Buk M1 battery positioned northeast of the city engaged first. Two 9M38 missiles launched in rapid succession, each streaking toward a separate target at Mach 3. Both intercepted. The detonations lit the sky like twin flashbulbs, briefly illuminating the clouds before fading. But using Buk missiles against $30,000 drones was an equation that favored Russia. Each 9M38 missile cost significantly more than its target. The Buk crews knew they had to be selective, engaging only drones that threatened critical infrastructure or that had penetrated past the outer Gepard screen. The real burden fell on the mobile fire teams. On the roof of a 9-story apartment building in the Saltivka district, a neighborhood that had already endured months of Russian shelling earlier in the war, a team of 4 soldiers manned a DSK 12.7mm heavy machine gun. They had sandbags stacked around their position, ammunition cans lined up, and a handheld thermal optic for spotting incoming drones against the dark sky. Their sector covered a northeast approach corridor roughly 2 kilometers wide. At 11:31 p.m., the spotter called a contact. A Shahed, barely visible, its small engine buzzing like an oversized lawnmower, was approaching at approximately 300 meters altitude and less than a kilometer away. The gunner swung the DSK onto the bearing and opened fire. Heavy 12.7mm rounds, each one capable of penetrating light armor, ripped through the air at 860 meters per second. The first burst went low. The gunner adjusted. Second burst connected. The drone's engine sputtered, then died. It glided silently for another 200 meters before nosediving into a vacant lot. They didn't celebrate. Another drone was already inbound. Between 11:30 p.m. and 1 a.m., the northern and southern waves overlapped, creating the most intense period of the engagement. At peak saturation, Ukrainian air defense units were tracking and engaging more than 30 drones simultaneously across the Kharkiv defense zone. Communication nets were flooded with contact reports. Gepard crews were calling for ammunition resupply. Mobile teams were requesting updated vectors from radar operators. How many of the 87 Shaheds did Ukraine ultimately intercept that night? A. 58. B. 71. C. 79. The answer comes at the end of this video. And then at 12:48 a.m., the southeastern wave hit. This was the third corridor. 23 Shaheds, launched from occupied Zaporizhzhia Oblast, approaching on a vector that Ukrainian planners had identified as the most dangerous. The southeastern approach passed over relatively flat terrain, with fewer elevated positions for mobile fire teams, and the drones on this vector were flying lower, some at barely 150 meters altitude, hugging the terrain to minimize radar detection time. A Gepard crew positioned near Chkalovsky detected the first contacts at 7.3 kilometers. But the low altitude meant the engagement window was compressed. By the time the fire control radar achieved a solid lock, the drones were inside 3 kilometers and closing fast. The crew engaged the lead drone at 2.8 kilometers and destroyed it, then immediately traversed to the second target, kill at 2.4 kilometers, third target, kill at 2.1 kilometers. They were burning through ammunition at a rate that would empty their magazines within 20 minutes at sustained engagement. The crew commander made a decision. He ordered his driver to reposition. The Gepard, a 47-ton tracked vehicle capable of road speeds up to 65 kilometers per hour, lurched forward and moved 1.4 kilometers south to a secondary firing position that offered better sight lines along the southeastern corridor. The repositioning took 4 minutes. 4 minutes during which drones were passing overhead unchallenged. But another crew was already covering the gap. A second Gepard, positioned 2 kilometers to the west, had shifted its radar scan to compensate. It engaged 3 drones during the repositioning window. 2 kills, 1 damaged, spiraling out of control and crashing into farmland short of the city. Subscribe to Warfist TV if you want to understand how modern warfare actually works. This is not theory. This is the battlefield. The coordination between Ukrainian air defense units that night was extraordinary. And it wasn't happening through some advanced networked command system. Much of it was voice radio communication. Crew commanders calling out target positions, handing off engagements when drones passed from one sector to another, warning adjacent units when they were repositioning or running low on ammunition. It was organized chaos. It was also remarkably effective. By 2 a.m. on November 18th, approximately 50 Shaheds had been launched toward Kharkiv, and 38 had been confirmed destroyed. Ukrainian crews had maintained an intercept rate of 76% through the most intense period of the attack. But the battle was far from over. Between 2 a.m. and 4 a.m., Russia launched the remaining 37 drones in a sustained trickle, sending them in groups of 3 to 5 at irregular intervals. This was the endurance phase. The goal was no longer saturation through volume. It was attrition through exhaustion. Keep the defenders awake, keep them firing, drain their ammunition stocks round by round. A Gepard crew near Derhachi reported that by 3:15 a.m. they had expended all 640 rounds of their primary ammunition load. A resupply vehicle, a standard military truck carrying additional 35mm ammunition cans, reached them at 3:42 a.m. The crew reloaded under active threat conditions, with drones still transiting overhead. They were back in action within 8 minutes. They would go on to destroy 4 more Shaheds before dawn. On the rooftops, the mobile fire teams rotated shifts. One soldier would man the gun while others rested in 20-minute intervals. Sleep was impossible. The constant drone engine noise, that distinctive buzzing whine of the Mado MD550, kept everyone on edge. Every few minutes, another one would pass over the city, sometimes low enough that crews could hear it before they could see it on thermal optics. At 3:47 a.m., a Shahed struck the first significant target. It impacted a transformer substation in the eastern industrial zone, detonating its 40-kilogram warhead against the main transformer housing. The explosion severed power to approximately 12,000 residents. Emergency repair crews were dispatched immediately, but the substation would require days to fully restore. 15 minutes later, at 4:02 a.m., a second Shahed penetrated the defense network from the southeast at extremely low altitude, estimated at barely 100 meters, and struck a section of heating pipeline infrastructure. The damage was contained but significant. A ruptured main that would need emergency welding in freezing November temperatures. Each successful Russian strike was a reminder of the stakes. Every drone that got through represented not just a tactical failure, but human suffering. Families losing power, losing heat, in a city that had already endured so much. But 16 penetrations out of 87 launches was not the result Russia had planned for. If you believe tactics win wars, type Warfist TV in the comments, because what these crews accomplished was nothing short of extraordinary. Now let's talk about what was supposed to happen at dawn. Russian operational planning for the November 18th strike included a second phase. The Shahed barrage was the hammer. The Kh-101 cruise missiles were the scalpel. According to documents later obtained by Ukrainian intelligence, fragments of a classified after-action review that surfaced through intercepted digital communications, at least 8 Kh-101 cruise missiles were supposed to launch from 295 MS Bear-H strategic bombers at approximately 5 a.m. Time to arrive over Kharkiv between 5:30 and 5:45 a.m., when Russian planners estimated Ukrainian air defense stocks would be at their lowest. The Kh-101 is a different beast entirely from the Shahed. It's a subsonic stealth cruise missile with a range of approximately 4,500 kilometers, carrying a 400-kilogram conventional warhead. It uses a combination of inertial navigation, terrain contour matching, and satellite guidance corrections to achieve circular error probable accuracy of 5 to 10 meters. Against degraded air defenses, it's a precision weapon designed to destroy specific targets. Power plants, command centers, communication nodes. The 295 MS bombers were airborne. Multiple aircraft likely operating from Engels 2 Air Base in Saratov Oblast had been detected by NATO surveillance aircraft earlier in the evening. Their flight profiles indicated a missile release point over the Caspian Sea, consistent with a long-range cruise missile attack on eastern Ukraine. At approximately 4:50 a.m., the missiles launched, but they never reached Kharkiv. Ukrainian electronic warfare units, the precise systems and methods are classified, but open-source analysts have identified the deployment of both ground-based and possibly vehicle-mounted EW systems across Kharkiv Oblast were waiting. These units had been active throughout the night, monitoring Russian guidance frequencies and preparing jamming packages specifically calibrated for the Kh-101's navigation systems. The Kh-101 relies on periodic satellite correction signals during its flight to maintain accuracy. Between correction windows, it navigates using inertial systems and terrain matching. If those satellite corrections are disrupted, if the missile receives corrupted or spoofed data, or if it fails to receive correction signals at all, its accuracy degrades significantly. The terrain matching system can compensate to some extent, but over flat terrain or at night, its effectiveness is reduced. Ukrainian EW units targeted those correction windows. The jamming was not constant. That would have been too easy for Russian systems to detect and counter. Instead, Ukrainian operators employed precisely timed bursts of interference, spoofing GPS signals during the narrow correction windows when the KH-101's guidance computer was most vulnerable. It was a technique that required exact knowledge of the missile's navigation cycle, intelligence that Ukrainian electronic warfare specialists had spent months gathering through previous engagements. The results were devastating for Russia. Of the cruise missiles launched, none achieved a confirmed hit on their intended targets. Several veered significantly off course, with at least 2 impacting in open farmland more than 15 kilometers from the nearest populated area. Others appeared to enter confused flight patterns, circling or flying erratic routes before either crashing or being engaged by air defense systems that still had missile stocks available precisely because the Shaheds had been stopped. The cruise missile phase, the entire operational rationale for expending 87 Shaheds in a single night, had failed completely. At 5:40 a.m., as the first gray light of dawn crept across the Kharkiv skyline, the last Shahed of the attack was destroyed by a mobile fire team operating from a position near the northern city limits. The engagement was almost anticlimactic. A single DSK burst. The drone broke apart in midair, fragments scattering across an empty parking lot. 71 of 87 Shaheds had been intercepted, an 81.6% intercept rate, sustained over 7 continuous hours against the largest single-city drone barrage of the war. 16 drones had struck targets, primarily industrial zones and utility infrastructure. 2 transformer substations damaged. 1 heating pipeline ruptured, several warehouse structures destroyed. Tragically, 3 civilians were injured by debris from a Shahed that detonated near a residential area after being hit by ground fire. But the city held. Its air defense held. Its people held. What would NATO have done differently in this scenario? Would a purely missile-based defense have been more effective? Or was Ukraine's layered approach of guided cannons, missiles, and machine guns the optimal solution? Comment your analysis below. Now let's talk about what Russia admitted in the aftermath. The intercepted after-action documents obtained by Ukrainian intelligence painted a picture of an operation that had failed at every level. Russian Air Force commanders acknowledged that the Shahed barrage had not achieved sufficient degradation of Kharkiv's air defenses to enable the cruise missile phase. They noted, with evident frustration, that Ukrainian Gepard systems had demonstrated unexpected mobility, repositioning between engagements faster than Russian intelligence had predicted. They had underestimated the density of mobile fire teams in the inner defense ring, and they had critically miscalculated the effectiveness of Ukrainian electronic warfare against the KH-101 guidance systems. One passage from the intercepted documents, translated and published by Ukrainian military intelligence in a public briefing on November 22nd, stated that the operation had failed to achieve a single primary objective and that the KH-101 component had been rendered ineffective by enemy countermeasures that exceeded pre-operation estimates. The cost to Russia was significant. 87 Shaheds, at a conservative estimate of $20,000 each, represented at least $1.74 million, and more likely closer to $3 to $4 million when factoring in logistics, transport, and launch infrastructure. The KH-101 missiles, at approximately $13 million each, according to widely cited defense estimates, added another $100 million or more to the operation's cost. Over $100 million spent for the destruction of 2 transformer substations and a heating pipe. The cost to Ukraine was primarily ammunition expenditure, 35mm rounds for the Gepards, several Buk missiles, thousands of rounds of 12.7mm and 14.5mm heavy machine gun ammunition. Significant, but a fraction of the Russian outlay. More importantly, no Ukrainian air defense system was destroyed. No Gepard was hit. No Buk launcher was damaged. Every crew survived the night. The network that Russia had spent $100 million trying to break was intact by morning. Let me put that in perspective. Russia expended the rough equivalent of launching 10 KH-101 cruise missiles, each a precision weapon carrying 400 kilograms of high explosive, and the net result was damage that Ukrainian repair crews had substantially fixed within 72 hours. Power was restored to affected residential areas within 36 hours. The heating pipeline was patched and operational within 48 hours. Compare that to the strategic objective. Knock out Kharkiv's heating grid before winter. Force a humanitarian crisis. Pressure Ukraine into concessions. Not a single element of that plan was achieved. The Battle of November 18th wasn't just a tactical victory, it was a doctrinal statement. Ukraine demonstrated that a layered mobile air defense network, combining modern Western-supplied systems like the Gepard with older Soviet-era platforms like the Buk M1 and low-tech mobile fire teams, could defeat saturation drone attacks even at unprecedented scale. The key was not any single weapon system. It was the integration, the ability of diverse units to coordinate, share information, hand off targets, and support each other in real time. This is something that cannot be bought off a shelf. It is built through training, through experience, through the kind of institutional knowledge that Ukrainian air defense crews have accumulated over nearly 4 years of continuous combat operations. Russia can produce more Shaheds. Iran can ship more components. But they cannot produce the tactical skill that shot down 71 of them in a single night. The Gepard, in particular, emerged from the November 18th engagement as arguably the single most important Western weapon system in Ukraine's anti-drone arsenal. Originally designed during the Cold War as a mobile anti-aircraft platform to protect West German armored formations from Soviet ground attack aircraft, it has found a second life as a drone killer. Its twin 35mm cannons, each firing at 550 rounds per minute, guided by a sophisticated search and tracking radar, are almost perfectly suited to engaging small, slow-moving aerial targets at ranges under 5 kilometers. Germany's decision to supply Gepards to Ukraine, initially seen as clearing out surplus equipment that the Bundeswehr no longer needed, has turned out to be one of the most consequential weapons transfers of the entire war. The mobile fire teams, operating with equipment as basic as heavy machine guns and thermal monoculars, proved that high-technology solutions are not always necessary. A trained soldier with a DSHK can engage a Shahed at ranges up to 1,500 meters. The cost per engagement is measured in dozens of rounds of 12.7mm ammunition, perhaps $50 worth of bullets against a $30,000 drone. The math is devastating for Russia. And the electronic warfare component revealed a capability that Ukraine has been quietly developing and refining. The ability to jam or spoof KH-101 cruise missile guidance is not something that happens by accident. It requires deep understanding of the missile's navigation architecture, precise signal intelligence, and sophisticated jamming equipment. Ukraine's success on November 18th suggests that Western intelligence sharing, combined with Ukrainian battlefield innovation, has produced EW capabilities that Russia seriously underestimates. There are broader lessons here for any military watching this war. First, saturation attacks can be defeated, but only by defenders who have invested in layered, mobile, and diverse defense networks. A single system, no matter how advanced, can be overwhelmed. A network of systems operating together is far more resilient. Second, cost asymmetry cuts both ways. Russia sought to exploit cost asymmetry by using cheap drones to exhaust expensive missiles. Ukraine countered by using cheap machine gun ammunition and relatively inexpensive autocannon rounds to destroy those cheap drones, preserving expensive missiles for high-value targets. The defender who manages cost asymmetry better wins the attrition battle. Third, electronic warfare is the invisible decisive factor. The Shahed barrage was the visible operation. The EW battle against the KH-101s was the decisive one, and it happened in silence, in the electromagnetic spectrum, where most viewers and even many analysts never look. Fourth, crew endurance and training matter more than equipment specifications. The systems defending Kharkiv that night had known limitations: limited ammunition, limited radar range, limited engagement envelopes. But the crews operating them performed beyond what the specifications would suggest possible because they were experienced, motivated, and fighting for their home city. Real tactics. Real consequences. Warfist TV. Now, the answer to our earlier question. How many of the 87 Shaheds did Ukraine intercept? The answer is B, 71. An 81.6% intercept rate, sustained over 7 continuous hours. 16 drones struck targets, primarily in industrial zones and utility infrastructure, but the cruise missile follow-up that was supposed to deliver the decisive blow never arrived. Ukrainian electronic warfare ensured that Russia's $100 million scalpel cut nothing but empty air. Some final questions to consider. Was Russia's decision to concentrate all 87 Shaheds on a single city the right tactical approach? Or would dispersing the attack across multiple cities have been more effective at stretching Ukrainian air defenses? Could Russian planners have anticipated the effectiveness of Ukrainian electronic warfare against the KH-101? And if so, should they have altered the timing or approach vectors of the cruise missile phase? And what would you have done differently? If you were commanding Kharkiv's air defense that night, would you have allocated resources differently? Used the book missiles more aggressively against the Shaheds? Held more mobile teams in reserve for the expected cruise missile phase? Or would you have trusted the electronic warfare screen and committed everything to the drone fight? Let us know in the comments. Subscribe to Warfist TV, because we break down the battles that textbooks will study for decades. Real tactics, real consequences, and the courage of the people who fight them. The skies over Kharkiv are quiet now. The craters in the industrial zone have been filled. The transformer stations are humming again. The heating pipes are carrying warmth to apartments where families sleep without knowing how close they came to a freezing, lightless winter. But the gun positions on the rooftops remain. The Gepard crews are still out there, engines idling, radars scanning, and the electronic warfare operators are listening, always listening, in the invisible war that never stops. Because modern warfare punishes hesitation, and Kharkiv's defenders did not hesitate. Not for a single second across 7 hours of relentless assault. They fought until dawn, and dawn found them still standing. Stay vigilant.